Hello and welcome to Must Read Fiction, a place for people who know that life is better with a novel in hand. I'm Erin Popelka, and I'm so delighted to be here today with author Rudy Ruiz. Welcome.
Thank you. Nice to see you, Erin.
Oh, it is such a pleasure. Rudy Ruiz is an American author, advocate, and social entrepreneur. The son and grandson of Mexican immigrants, Rudy Ruiz was born in Brownsville, Texas, and raised along the US Mexico border. His short fiction has garnered several notable awards, including 4 International Latino Book Awards for his short story collection, Seven for the Revolution. His first novel, I have in my hands, The Resurrection of Fulgencio Ramirez, is due out in September 2020, and we are going to talk about it today. So, Rudy Ruiz, please tell me about The Resurrection of Fulgencio Ramirez.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Erin. And thanks for having me on Must Read Fiction. Appreciate it. The novel Resurrection of Fulgencio Ramirez is labor of love, really something I've been working on for about 2 decades. So that gives you an idea. I always used to hear these stories about authors working on books for decades, and I was like, how in the world can they be so inefficient? And then I fell into the same trap, which is basically a trap of you love a story and you want to keep working on it and keep shaping it and keep crafting it until it's ready for people to read it and for a publisher to get behind it. So for me, it just took that long. But The Resurrection of Fulgencio Ramirez is a magical realism novel set along the US-Mexico border. And it follows this character, Fulgencio Ramirez, who's kind of a complicated hero, and a very interesting guy, kind of larger than life personality, who is growing up in the 1950s on the border, and is really, as you mentioned, he's the son of immigrants, just like I am. However, his character's journey starts back in the 1950s, in a time that was, very challenging for a lot of minorities. And he was the first in his family to go to college, and he's pursuing this American dream that he has. And a lot of it is fueled not only by wanting to achieve his family's dreams, but by this deep love that he has for his high school sweetheart, a girl named Carolina Mendelsohn, who is the daughter of the local pharmacist in this mythical border town of La Frontera. And so she's from an affluent, family, well-to-do. They come from different sides of the railroad tracks, so to speak. And he's really fueled by his desire to be worthy of her and to be able to be her husband someday as he pursues his American dream. And so you kind of fall in love with them as a couple, hopefully, if you enjoy the book, and you root for them, and you hope that Fulgencio can overcome like all these obstacles that both life and society throw in their way, but also there's this magical realism element. So you have a mystical curse that haunts the men in Fulgencio's family that's also a way that he has to overcome in order to be the person he needs to be with Carolina.
Yes, it is a really dynamic story. And certainly you gave a preview of some of the elements at play in the book. And in reading it, it's a really fun read because of all of these elements. There's really something for everyone. Like you said, there's a love story, there's some action and adventure, there's this family curse, the maldición, there's magical realism, there is ghosts, there is music. And so all of that actually made for a really fun experience as a reader. And I'm curious, as the writer of this book, was that, equally fun and adventurous, or were you like, oh my gosh, what is this story doing now? Like, how did that go in the writing of it?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. When I wrote the first draft, it was very much came from inspiration. Really one of those things where it just suddenly hit me. I needed to write this story. A large part of the inspiration was my father. My father is sort of the basis for a lot of the inspiration behind the character of Fulgencio. So he grew up in the 50s along the border. And when I was growing up, he shared with me a lot of stories of his youth. He himself had a great voice, and he would sing these old Mexican traditional boleros, which are the songs that are in the book, these love songs. And he sang them very passionately and so forth. And, it just kind of, as a writer, sometimes of fiction, you put yourself into you kind of think of what if, what if my dad's life had been like very different and than it was, what might it have been like? And I just kind of went down this rabbit hole of imagining, creating this character loosely based on him, but then building on the stories he had told me. And it just came very naturally. I love magical realism. I was a big fan of, I am a big fan of Gabriel Garcia Marquez. He's one of my favorite authors, and I drew a lot of inspiration from him. And so it came very naturally to me. And then the music part and the songs, I felt were really, I really always wanted to include them, and I was very happy that Blackstone, the publisher, agreed with me, including them in English and in Spanish, because they're like a really rich cultural element that I just feel helps immerse the reader into that time period and into the culture and into, what kind of person is it that when he feels love in his heart can just suddenly stand up in a crowded room and belt out a song, and have people like swooning and clapping and everything. And that's sort of the kind of character that Fulgencio is.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. Well, I'm glad that like Fulgencio was as much fun to write as he was to read. And you actually you spoke about your father and you anticipated my next question because you did mention your father as an inspiration on the acknowledgements page. And on that acknowledgements page, you wrote the vivid stories of his upbringing on the border in the 1950s and the experiences and tales he shared with me over the years served as the primary inspiration for the resurrection of Fulgencio Ramirez. And I was wondering if you could, are there some stories that you could share or some family histories or things, I'm a curator of stories. I love stories. And so are there any stories that you could share with us that kind of either work their way into the book or help to inspire it?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I think one of my favorite aspects is in the setting of the book, it's very much, as I mentioned, it's set on the border and it moves very fluidly between the United States side of the border and the Mexican side of the border. And the setting, when Fulgencio is in the US side of the border, he's largely hangs out at his pharmacy, which he has an old drugstore, like just exactly what he dreamt of when he was a teenager in the 50s, in this town called La Frontera, which means the border. But then when he was growing up, he spent a lot of time on this ranch on the Mexican side of the border where his grandfather lived. And that ranch is called El Dos de Copas, which means the Two of Cups, which is sort of like the Two of Hearts in the deck of playing cards, except it's the Spanish deck of playing cards. So it's kind of like the lowest card in the deck, and it says a lot about hey, it's just a small little, it's not some grandiose ranch, it's like a small little patch of dirt, that his family clings to. And so in the book, he goes there often, he kind of lives there and then he goes and works in his pharmacy. And that fluidity of moving back and forth across the border was something that was very real, like for me growing up and for my dad growing up. And on the weekends, that ranch is actually a real ranch that belonged to my dad's grandfather and then belonged to his mom, and then his mom gave it to him. And he would take me out there when I was a kid, wake me up early Sunday mornings, and we'd drive out. It'd take about maybe 30 minutes to get from our home in Brownsville, Texas, to this little ranch in Mexico, outside of Matamoros, Mexico. And, he taught me there how to ride horses and how to, basically appreciate the open land. And he had some cattle out there. And I think we have a cattle drive. Yeah, we have a cattle drive in the story where Fulgencio and his friends and allies take these cattle on a cattle drive to the river because there's a drought and they need to get water, the cattle to water. And that was actually based on a real experience I had as a kid doing that with my dad during a drought. So, it's things like that to me were they felt magical as they happened. And then through the lens of memory, they felt even more magical. It's not something you think you'd get to experience in life, and so I tried to capture some of those snippets and put them in the book. And even though they feel magical in the book, they're actually based in some reality.
Oh, fantastic. It actually warms my heart that El Dos de Copas is a real place and based on a real place, like, because it does, it really has that feel, like you feel the land, you feel the presence of the land, and you feel the presence of the history of that land. And so that certainly came through in the book. And that's great that that was something that you grew up around.
Yeah, that was really meaningful, to me. So my dad, we would go out there, and my dad would, of course, tell me stories. Like he would tell me how when he was a kid, he'd go out to that ranch, and how his grandfather taught him some of those old songs, and how he first got into singing. Like he would sit up on the rooftop of his grandfather's little house on the ranch, and he would sing like as loud and as as powerfully as he could to like develop his voice and his lungs and whatnot for singing. And I always imagine that, imagine this kid out there on this ranch just singing his heart out on this rooftop, and it stayed with me. So I was glad I was able to kind of capture some of that spirit and weave it into this tale in the novel.
Oh, fantastic. And you also talked about, kind of with the music in the book that, the songs are both in Spanish and in English. And The Resurrection of Fulgencio Ramirez is also being simultaneously published both in Spanish and in English. And so I wanted to just talk to you a little bit about the influences of both of those languages, both on you personally, and also how those two languages worked their way together into the book.
Yeah, well, that's also something I'm very, very grateful to Blackstone Publishing for, the fact that they went ahead and published the book simultaneously in English and Spanish. That's not something that's very common. But, when I pitched the idea to them, it was really because the book and the culture and the characters in the book are very bilingual. They are very bicultural. And that's really what life is like on the border for me growing up there. I'd be conversing with a family member or friend, and you, not even really consciously thinking about it, you shift back and forth between English and Spanish, not even noticing, So even sometimes today, all these years later, when my mom, who's 80 years old and grandmother to my kids, when she's talking to us and visiting us, she'll suddenly fly into Spanish, and the kids will look at me like, does she know that she's just switched into Spanish? And I'm like, I don't know if we really notice when we do it. but it's a great aspect of the culture. It's really neat to have the book. The English language version has Spanish sprinkled throughout, and it has the songs in the original language. But then we also have the Spanish language version of the book available. And my hope is like maybe some families where there's people that speak Spanish and read Spanish, like maybe they'll read it that way and share it with their family members, in English. But it's very much part of the culture, and for me, part of my upbringing. I actually spoke Spanish first, and started learning English when I entered kindergarten at age 5, and from then on had a very bilingual existence.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. Well, thank you. Thank you. I can certainly speak to the English version. It was delightful to, have both the Spanish music and some of the Spanish words. And the curse, like just, it was always listed as maldición, and you can sort of feel the presence of that word in the Spanish that kind of came through, and the heaviness that came through, as that worked its way through the story. So that was a lot of fun.
Thanks. I'm glad you picked up on that. Yeah, I played with whether I should call it a curse or keep it in Spanish and call it the maldición, as you said. And I just felt like somehow it had that kind of a gravity to it by keeping it in Spanish. It made it feel a little bit more otherworldly, I guess, since you're reading the book in English. But it was an interesting element, I think an interesting element of the story that kind of made the magical realism aspect of the book kind of more central to the plot.
Fantastic. Well, I definitely worked for me as this one reader, for sure, for sure. And so we're having this conversation in September 2020, and we are still in the midst of COVID-19. And so knowing that, how are you planning to celebrate the release of your debut novel?
Well, it's probably going to be the same way that our family's been celebrating every birthday and Mother's Day and Father's Day this year, which has been like basically my wife, our 2 children, and myself just basically hunkered down at home and, trying to support each other. But, which is great. It's great. You really couldn't ask for more. As long as we're healthy and we're together, that's wonderful. And as far as the book release, I think one thing that's been interesting is, I mean, usually you would go out and you'd be doing events, with readers and bookstores, and you would get to meet people and like autograph books for them, and so I'll miss that part of the personal contact with readers, which I think is really nice. And as a writer, because you usually work in isolation, for such long periods of time, it's nice to see the book in people's hands and get to talk to them. And if they've already read it, get to hear their reactions and their questions. So I miss that. But then on the other hand, everybody's adapted so quickly to these virtual events that's kind of fun, because you kind of get to meet more people from more parts of the country without having to travel there. And so in a way, you kind of get a broader spectrum of interaction, I think, maybe than you normally would. So I think it'll be, a different way of celebrating the release, but I think it'll still be a lot of fun, and it'll still be enjoyable to interact with people about the book.
Oh, fantastic. Well, certainly this is one of those conversations that is crossing many state borders and, happening through the power of Zoom. Well, thank you. I hope that like all of those celebrations with your family and connecting with readers all over the country, though it may look a little different than the past, I hope that you're able to have those great conversations.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope so. I think it'll happen.
Fantastic.
Thanks
Yeah.
to you for having me
Yeah.
here and for supporting writers.
It is truly my pleasure. So must readers, please check out The Resurrection of Fulgencio Ramirez by Rudy Ruiz. And thank you so very much, Rudy Ruiz, for having this conversation with me today.
Yeah, thank you, Erin. I appreciate it. Thanks for supporting the book. And one of the things, if I could just say one parting comment about it, is I think these days, there's a lot of tough news about division in our society, and like the border and immigration, and those issues have been real hot topics for years now, but definitely at a boiling point, around the country right now, with divisions between people over race and culture and so forth. And I think the book, one thing I love about the timing of the book coming out right now rather than 20 years ago, is just that it's a really powerful vision of healing, the power of people to be able to overcome differences, and like the border being not just a place of division, but a place where a vision for people being together in harmony can actually, happen. So like that message of hope and positivity is something I feel excited about the book capturing, for this particular time in our lives.
Yeah, and I'm so grateful you said that, because there's definitely that spirit in the book of these borders that oftentimes feel really rigid are actually like super fluid in the book, right? Like ghosts are characters, right? So actually even that border between life and death that oftentimes feels really rigid, right? Like that's it, is not rigid in the world you created in The Resurrection of Fulgencio Ramirez. And likewise, to your point too, of these questions right now politically around the US-Mexico border that does feel really charged and loaded and fraught. It's kind of nice to be able to have a space where that's actually a wonderful asset to be able to go back and forth, to like, have the ranch on one side, have La Frontera, on the other side, and for those worlds to exist in kind of a really like fluid space. So thank you for both saying that and for kind of creating the space for us to play in that in a way that's kind of hard to play right now.
Absolutely. My pleasure. It's an honor for me to bring the story to readers. Like I said, I feel like this was something that was shared with me by people like my father, my mother, my grandparents, and just a place where I grew up. So it is an honor and to capture that and to share it with other readers from other parts of the country and the world where they may not be familiar with the fact that the border can be that kind of place, a place where beautiful things happen and people live and families live and love blooms,
Fantastic. And that is actually probably a perfect place to close. May love bloom on all different sides of all different borders. So thank you very much, Rudy Ruiz, and must readers, please check out The Resurrection of Fulgencio Ramirez. Thanks again.
Thank you, Erin. Have a wonderful day.